The Borgue Field Name Project. The seeds of the Borgue Field Name Project were sown at a talk in February 2019, organised by the Place in the Biosphere Project, part of the Great Places scheme run by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. The talk about Borgue by historian Professor Ted Cowan and place name enthusiast Michael Ansell inspired a proposal by people living locally to take a closer look at place names and field names in the area. A plan was hatched to gather field names, analyse their meanings and share the information with a wider audience. The speakers, myself, John and Michael, were key members of the team, and in these 3 short presentations we will explain how the Field Place Name Project developed along with some of the outputs. If you take a walk through any landscape in Scotland, there's a story to be revealed of human lives and the impact we have had on the land around us. If you've used a map to go for a walk, you'll no doubt have come across intriguing or unusual place names. But did you know that nearly all fields have a name, and that these names might tell you about the history of the field and its use over the centuries? Old field names act as clues to the past, telling the story of a place, and can connect you with the history of the area. Put yourself in the shoes of the farmer who originally named them. The names originated in a very practical way to identify them for farm labourers. It was clearly important that they did not go out and plough the wrong field. Many of these names were never written down, so that the names used today are the result of a largely oral tradition, where the original name may have evolved or changed over many years and can sometimes be hard to decipher. I've had a lifelong fascination with maps, and Michael and Ted's talk in the pub was a light bulb moment, and I grabbed the chance with both hands. How brilliant would it be to be able to say, "I saw a hare in the drum field today," instead of, "I saw a hare in the field that's next but one to the one on the right-hand side of the road going up the lane." Or to be able to tell a farmer that there's a sheep in trouble in the horse park. We decided to limit the scope of the project to an area from the Fleet in the west to the Dee in the east and north to the A75. I started to contact local farmers, and armed with a 1 to 25,000 OS map and large photocopies of the 1854 first edition maps for the area, I set out. If I was lucky, there was a farm map to work from, but usually it was a case of referring to the OS map. I made notes on the names and any other information that came to light on why a field had a particular name, and I also made sure that the field boundaries shown were correct, as many field boundaries have changed over time. One problem that I did encounter was that, not being local, it was sometimes difficult for me to record the pronunciation of a name. A neat version of the maps and notes was sent to Alan and Michael, and just like magic, their analysis on the field names came back. I transferred the field names to a large working base map, and all the other information collated onto a working spreadsheet. John started uploading the information onto the digital map, and Anne updated her painted map. Luckily, in many cases, the farms had been in the same family for several generations, or the families had only moved from one farm to another within the area. This resulted in a wealth of other information and recommendations on who to go and see next. But in a few cases, the farms had changed ownership many times and were now being run by incomers. Possibly the biggest challenge was the area around Culraven, Brighouse and High Nunton, where the old names had been discarded. However, I was lucky that an article in the Galloway News asking for help was read by a lovely gentleman living in Castle Douglas, who used to work on Culraven in the 1960s. He could remember the names as if he had just stepped in from the fields that morning, and not only that, but he also put me in touch with some of his friends who also used to work on other farms in the area. This was a real breakthrough. However, sometimes we did struggle with actually putting names onto the correct fields on the map. So in a few cases we ended up with a variety of names for some of the fields, which we had to untangle. I was overwhelmed with how supportive the local community was and how keen everyone was to share and to find out more about the names of the fields. I've been very fortunate to have met some really lovely people, to have been welcomed into their houses and to have heard wonderful stories about their farms and the area. It's been a real privilege, and I would like to thank everyone who has helped. I continued to make good progress, but finding the names gradually became much harder, and in fact it was really disheartening to be told by a couple of farmers that my field names are my business, and even more so when I was told data is the new oil. How much are my field names worth? So I realised that if I was going to make more progress in filling in the blanks, I would have to look for alternative information sources. David Devereux came to my rescue when he told me about Adam Gray Sr.'s booklet in the museum. Adam's booklet, dating from 1999, did indeed contain field names for many of the farms in the parish, but unfortunately no maps. However, next to some of the names was a number, and I realised that this was the field number from the 1908 OS map, so I was able to use that data to fill in some blanks. Adam's name covered the list of the old parish of Borgue, extending further north than the A75, so as I had the information to hand, I decided to follow in his footsteps, and this took me as far north as Greenslack, adding in quite a few more fields along the way. Whilst Alan and Michael were wrestling with the linguistic origins of the names, and you can hear more about this from Michael, I enjoyed the slightly more quirky discoveries that we made along the way. On the map on the left, you can see that two farms both have a field next to the Weasel Wood, which does indeed still have weasels in it. One is called the Weasel Field, and one is called the Weasel Wood Field. Very often where two farms meet, the fields are named after the adjoining farm. The map on the right shows the boundary between Borland Farm and Carrick Farm. Borland March is a field on Carrick Farm and is the field closest to Borland farmland, whereas Big Carrick is a field on Borland Farm which is closest to Carrick farmland. At Ratra we puzzled over the field name Piper Walls, and it was only when we looked at the 1854 map that the reason for the field name became apparent. An old croft long disappeared. And one of my absolute favourite stories is that the lane running alongside this farm, together with one of the fields, was called Cuddle Cosy. Apparently this was a favourite route for courting couples from the village. At Ingleston we puzzled over who Peter Patterson was. It turned out that in 1945 he was a dairyman at Coursyard working for James Brown, and presumably lived in a cottage next to the field. I especially loved the moments during conversations when I was asked, "Ooh, would you be interested in seeing this?" and a treasure would appear from a cupboard or the cellar. Such as this wonderful set of diaries from the Mains of Twynham farm, dating back to 1896, which contained so much detail on day-to-day farming life. And on the right you can see an extract from a huge map from the Ardwell estate, which showed how land was often swapped rather than sold. It says, "Mill of Plunton was ex-cammed to Mrs. Elizabeth Murray Usher of Cally in 1931. At Borland of Borgue, I was lucky enough to be shown two very old estate maps, one from 1780 on the left and the other from 1819, both beautifully coloured, which both contained a wealth of detail. Fabulous field names, such as Scrogie Yerd, and they also showed me that the old high road used to skirt around the other side of the motte. This is the road in 1780, and this is where it is in today's time. You could see how the shape of the two large fields here in 1780 are exactly the same today. This map of Meikle Ross by John Gallone from the 1700s was first shown to us by Archie from the Damp Project and was a treasure trove of information. As well as John Paul Jones's ship, it also showed that the position of the roads had changed and that the original Ross farm was on the western side of the point in Borgue Bay. I overlaid the old names onto the modern map to show again that whilst most of the field boundaries are the same, it is only the name that has changed over time. The most recent treasure to come to light was this map from Borgue House, or Les Borgues, as it was known in 1780. Again, the roads have changed, but many of the fields are exactly the same shape and name. Sadly, at one farm we were too late. Here the names of the fields were lost many, many years ago, and even in 1999 Adam Gray recorded them as first, second and third fields. The farmer was as disappointed as I was, but delighted to find that I could tell him that some of his fields did have older names, which he was keen to bring back into use. Before I finish, I would like once again to thank everyone who has helped in any way over the past 2 years. But we're not quite finished. We have still got some fields which are unnamed. At Clockandolly, Glenterry and a few fields in the central area around Earlston and Gled Park. If you think you could shed some light on these field names, I would be very grateful if you could take a look at the website, which John will be talking about, and see if you can fill in any of the gaps. Because if we don't manage to find their names, then this is the only way that these fields will be referred to. And finally, I would love to encourage you to undertake the same project in your own area before it's too late. Thank you.